It's not discretionary. It's mandatory language, shall take into custody. We're not talking about, we're talking about sex trafficking, human trafficking, drug trafficking, money laundering, firearm offenses. These are serious crimes, and the statute in question requires that it be mandatory, not discretionary. And so what the court says is perhaps most problematic is that an officer cannot rely on the fact of conviction. Why? Because the DHS memorandum says, directly contrary to the statute, and this is a quote from the court, DHS personnel shall not rely on the fact of conviction when deciding to enforce the law. In fact, this takes away their discretion and says you cannot detain based upon a violation of an aggravated felony. You cannot take that into account. That's not prosecutorial discretion. It takes away the discretion. And then going back to the oral arguments that were made before the court, and I found this very fascinating, that during the debate with this, Biden's own Solicitor General responds to Justice Kavanaugh, who says, I think your position is that instead of judicial review, if you're saying they don't have standing, that Congress would have to resort to impeachment or dramatic steps in the face of such defiance of the law. The Biden Solicitor General says she agrees. In the face of a dramatic abdication of statutory responsibility by the executive branch, such steps would be warranted. In other words, the Biden administration's own Solicitor General is saying, own legal position that impeachment is the proper remedy for dramatic abdication of statutory responsibility. And then returning to the founding fathers, they didn't have a whole lot of criminal statutes back then at the Constitutional Convention. James Madison, when they're forming the Department of State, now there was called Foreign Affairs, says, well, what if they fill the department with unworthy men of public trust? Then he says on the House floor, if an unworthy man be continued in office, the House of Representatives can at any time impeach him. Finally, Justice Story, who was quoted on the other side, a very famous Supreme Court justice in 1833, says, so where a Lord Admiral has neglected to safeguard the seas, that shall be deemed an impeachable offense. I would argue, Mr. Chairman, this is exactly the case we have here. We have a Lord Admiral, a Secretary of Homeland Security, charged with defense of air, land, and sea, as Justice Story was talking about, and is not defending our borders. And to those my dear friends on the other side of the aisle, say that the numbers did not go dramatically under the prior administration, I don't know where you were. Remain in Mexico, I worked with the administration prior. I passed it out of my committee. Mr. Pfluger is correct. There are about 64, executive actions that this president took to rescind the prior executive orders that were working. For instance, political asylum cannot be adjudicated. Once you're detained, you're removed. They're adjudicated outside the United States, therefore ending catch and release. Therefore, 8 million encounters cannot stay in the United States.
Will the gentleman yield for a question?
Let me finish. I don't see how anyone with a straight face can argue that the numbers have skyrocketed under this administration. Now, I live in a border state, and I just came back from the border, and I saw the detention space. I've done it many times, overflowing. And it's created a human tragedy. I look at the migrants I look at them with compassion, and I see a human tragedy before our eyes when I see them in detention space, knowing that they won't have legal status, that the women are going to go to sex trafficking, the little young men are going to go to MS-13. What are we doing? We're creating a criminal enterprise in the United States, not to mention one of the most dangerous environments I've seen. I chaired this committee, 300 apprehended on the terror watch list. How many more got in? As the FBI director said, it only took 19 hijackers to bring down the World Trade Center. Look, I think there's legal and framer justification and moral justification. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Chair.
Who's seeking recognition?
Ramirez.
Ms. Ramirez, for what purpose?